extend temporary protected status for Somalis in America is believed to be prompted by a viral article from a conservative activist. The article claims tax money stolen in fraud schemes in Minnesota, such as Feeding Our Future, is funding the Somali-based terror group Al-Shabaab. Lou Raguse, who has covered this story since the beginning, takes a closer look at the claims.
Their goal was to make as much money for themselves as they could.
Former U.S. Attorney Andy Lugar and lead prosecutor in the Feeding Our Future case, Joe Thompson, have always said greed was the motivating factor for the defendants in the theft of $300 million in taxpayer dollars during the pandemic. Now, an article in online conservative outlet City Journal makes an even more consequential claim that millions of those dollars landed in the hands of terrorists. The largest funder of Al-Shabaab is the Minnesota taxpayer, the headline reads. But evidence that has come out in court shows that the vast majority of the millions sent overseas by the thieves has gone to Kenya, not Somalia.
They were building an entire apartment building in Nairobi.
Several of the Somali-born defendants have family and connections in Kenya, where notably the money cannot be touched by the U.S. government or the Somalia-based terror group. But if any fraud money has been sent by defendants or their families to relatives in Somalia, an expert on Al-Shabaab says indirectly, the terror group would receive a cut.
Nobody has to mean to fund Al-Shabaab.
Former counterterrorism analyst at the U.S. State Department, Tricia Bacon, says Al-Shabaab taxes, or more accurately, extorts Somali people, which is how it funds itself.
But that's sort of the cost of doing business in Somalia, because the government has been so ineffective at protecting people from Al-Shabaab's extortion that, you don't really have a choice of whether or not to pay.
The feds believe that some fraud money inevitably ended up back in Somalia, but not nearly as much as the article states. GOP lawmakers have asked U.S. Attorney Daniel Rosen to investigate. Well, it's worth noting, though, that former U.S. Attorney Andy Lugar told me today that if there was any evidence of providing material support to a terrorist group, he definitely would have charged it, as he did in other cases while he was in that office. Julie.
Yeah, and worth noting, he has a great reputation. I mean, no one questions that. But would they be able to track the money that's going to Somalia? I know it's not as easy as just wiring someone money there. And if so, how much money do they think ultimately would have gone there?
You can't wire money to Somalia. There are ways that people can send money back to family members, which essentially consists of communicating with somebody there, paying somebody here, and then they'll pay the people in return over there. But long story short, they don't know. They don't have an idea. I've heard estimates from sources that it could be as much as $1 million or a little bit more, but nowhere near like the amount of money that's been sent to Kenya, as I reported.
All right. Thank you, Lou.
Yep.
The top Republican in Minnesota.
We are back in Minnesota again, yet again.
House Majority Whip Tom Emmer calling for an investigation into claims about state tax dollars ending up in the hands of overseas terrorists linked to Al-Qaeda. National correspondent Jeff Paul reports. He's live in Los Angeles for us. Jeff?
Yeah, John, and Congressman Emmer says if this is in fact true, it would not only be a grave national security concern, but a slap in the face to the hardworking, law-abiding people of Minnesota. This all stems back to a single report published by urban policy magazine City Journal, which is published by conservative think tank, the Manhattan Institute. The report, citing unnamed sources, alleges funding that was supposed to go to state programs to help with housing and feeding people was being stolen. Without giving an exact amount, it claims some of that money was then sent to Somalia through a complex network where it eventually ends up aiding the Al-Qaeda-linked terror group Al-Shabaab. Congressman Emmer, along with 3 other members of Congress, have addressed a letter to Minnesota's U.S. Attorney demanding answers.
You simply can't continue doing this. It's one thing to bilk the Minnesota taxpayers. That's bad enough. But to ship the money to a terrorist organization, Al-Shabaab, I mean, any average Minnesotan should not want to put up with that at all.
Minnesota Congresswoman Ilhan Omar spoke at the state's capitol yesterday with other state leaders. While she didn't directly mention the allegations of the report, she responded to Trump's announcement last week that he was terminating temporary protected status for Somalis in Minnesota.
There is not a single evidence that the president or his coonies have put forth that there are any single resource from taxpayers in Minnesota that has gone to aid and abet terrorism. That language is dangerous.
A DOJ official tells Fox News it takes fraud of any kind extremely seriously, and this referral will be thoroughly investigated. John.
All right, Jeff Paul Force with the latest from LA. Thank you, Jeff.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
This is pretty crazy. This is really a story that's been dragging on since 2018, and I'm going to get right to it. We are back in Minnesota. The timeline of things that happened in Minnesota, we're just adding to it. I mean, this is just the same story continuing on for years and years and years with information, to my knowledge, that is new potentially with where some of this money was going. Not surprising, but there's been a lot of stuff going on in Minnesota, obviously, and this is just not even like celebrity type stuff. A lot of things that have been bubbling up to the national limelight of shining a light on our country, basically. Like, how are we running? How is this country working? That type of stuff. So you had the police killings. You had the 2015 is probably the first one I remember. I was living in Minnesota, believe it or not. I have talked about that a little bit. Living in Minnesota, cold-ass Minnesota, 2014 to about 2017 or so. So I am familiar with Minnesota, very familiar with Minnesota. So 2015, that you had the killing of Jamar Clark. He was a 24-year-old. He was unarmed, shot by Minneapolis police during a confrontation. I'm not going to relive all of these, just going through the timeline. Philando Castile, which is out of all of them, the toughest ones for me. If you don't remember, that's the one where the guy got pulled over. This was the early age of Facebook. I remember that going viral on Facebook. Not kind of the early age, 2016, but the early age of the kind of the social divide. Facebook was never really, before Trump, before 2016, it was never really like a dividing political platform, even in 2014, 15. It was just a place where you saw your old high school friends, basically. That's how it started. But this was one of the big ones where there was video. It was the officer Cam, I believe. He was shot during the traffic stop, and he was telling the officer, "Hey, I'm armed and licensed. I'm not." I forgot how it went, but he was like, "I'm not doing anything." And I don't know what happened. That cop just shot him. That was wild. Then there's tons of other ones, but then let's go to 2020. Of course, we got Floyd. Then we had the riots. All of that started in Minnesota, like bubbled up from Minnesota. That whole thing, one of the craziest eras of our country. Then you had the Dante Wright, which was absolute nonsense. We covered that one. Amir Locke. And then you just keep going on and on. That's where a lot of the defund the police comes from, and Ilhan Omar rose up through that, and other political figures. And we now have the Feeding Our Future COVID child nutrition fraud. We had child care assistance program daycare fraud allegations in 2018. So it just never stops with Minnesota. We're in a union. So they're a part of the union. They're something that you have to look at in a certain lens. You have to. I don't live there anymore, but we have to kind of look at it. Why is all this stuff happening there? Just from a first principles fundamental, why is this happening? I think this. Tell me if I'm out. This is this is unique. I mean, California is a huge state, doesn't have, there's a lot of stuff that's bubbled up through it, but this stuff from Minnesota is like era-changing stuff, especially with Floyd. That's how you can make that argument. But the scandal here, there's multiple scandals. The scandal here basically is fraud through many Somalians, foreigners in Minnesota. The Scandinavian kind of founded Minnesota. This started in 2017, 2018. The Feeding Our Future program, I'm going to go into that a little bit more detail, but just going through the timeline and what the kind of the big picture, how much are we talking about, how big is this? But they grew through COVID. Everybody was throwing money around. Trump was a huge part of the problem. Congress was a huge part of the problem with that, of course. So I'm not putting this all on. Of course, Walz has responsibility and others, but this COVID stuff should have never went down the way it did. And the president right now doesn't acknowledge that. So I don't need him poking his chest out when he doesn't even acknowledge that he was part of the problem in the first place. Of course, politics, he's not going to do that, but I don't have those problems. I'll make sure to let him know, and anybody who follows him knows, that he's a part of the problem as much as Tim Walz or anybody else. The funding for these, and that's a little bit off track, so I'm not going to crash out on the CARES Act and all that. The funding came from Congress, and it shouldn't have never came. There should have never been a reason for it. We know that now objectively. But so there was fraud happening during the COVID years, and state officials, they were in Minnesota looking into this deeper than I've ever, from yesterday to today. They were suspicious from 2018. And the story, part of the story that I'm going to tell you is the people who were doing the fraud, you might have already known this, I'm just catching up on all of this, they sued based on discrimination because they wanted to keep the fraud going. That's how much they take your kindness, our kindness, as a weakness. I say, oh, you have a kind heart. Oh, you have a Christian heart. Oh, I'm supposed to love everyone and have open borders, and I'm not supposed to be racist. Up into being unlived by a black or what age or whoever you're not racist against. You could do it from black to white. It doesn't matter. There is nobody immune from the racism thing. But we're obviously talking about it from one way here. They would rather you be unlived than be racist. So they sued to keep the money flowing on a just overtly blazing illegal fraud con scam. And they sued. That's how brazen they were. It's nothing but it is the misinterpretation of Christianity. It's the misinterpretation of what it means to be a good person. It is the fall of the patriarchy in our country. That's what this all represents here. It did get, the first time I heard of it was 2022. The FBI raided Feeding Our Future's offices and more than a dozen related sites. It's coming back in the news because we're at the sentencing right now. The trials of the first groups started in 2024. I don't know why this stuff takes so long. What? Because they had so much money, they had great lawyers. If I was involved in this, I would have been under the poke. I would have been buried under the pokey in 2022. Trials for the first group started in 2024. Now we have multiple guilty verdicts. We're going to talk about Amy Bach, the founder of Feeding Our Future, went to trial, convicted. So that's why it's bubbling back up. Federal judges are handing down long sentences and huge restitution orders, like a 28-year sentence and roughly $48 million in restitution for one key ringleader. So now it's all bubbling up. I think Christopher Russo, I didn't read the Christopher Russo. I just did kind of general searches on it. But I believe Christopher Russo is the one that did an article that kind of bubbled it back up as well. So I'm going to be going through this scandal bit by bit here. Mike Has Bad Knees says, they will always try to use your own principles against you. Well, that's why you have to be that's why you really have to have true principles. I mean, you can't have half-stepping principles. Your principle can't be, I have a country and my borders are open and we have to care for everyone. No, that's not a principle. No, my country has borders. And yes, we can have, everybody's here as an immigrant in some way, shape, or form, but it has to make sense. Minnesota is wild. What was the last one I was just talking about with Minnesota? I was just talking about that. I just did a live on Minnesota just a little while ago. I don't even think I mentioned it in the timeline of things where all this stuff was going crazy. So the first thing is like, well, how big is this? Let's take a look at how big this scandal is and what the kind of the real implications are of it. It goes back to a basic basic shell company type scam. And many of them are Somalian. Now, the country of Somalia is, since the 90s, has been just in complete disarray to my knowledge. Like, there's nothing really there in Somalia. It's just pure chaos. You might have seen the movie Captain Phillips. I mean, the first thing I think about, unfortunately, when I think about Somalians, but is the meme where, what was the meme? We're the captains now, basically. But that does represent the mind frame. If you are in a state, that's nothing really against Somalians. If we had the electricity go out, then that's what it would be. You would have to go get your 2A protected self-defense tool and make sure that your house is protected. Otherwise, somebody's going to come in and say, your wife is now mine now, literally. So that's what happened in Somalia. So yeah, is some of it low IQ, poor culture? Of course, all of that plays a role, but they're just in basic survival tactics since like early 90s. No government type of stuff. I don't know where the government is now, but I know the whole thing fell apart. No Navy, no Army. It was just rebels running around with guns in boats. And that's why there were Somali pirates. They have no fear. They don't really value life or death. Like, I'm not saying that they don't, but not in the same way that we, gratefully grew up in this country valuing. And the pirate thing came from the fishing out there. And so people came, since the government wasn't really there, people all over the world kind of came over there and ransacking their fishing lanes and all that. So then they got guns and went out there, and it was just, they started doing ransom. Remember, that was crazy. That was like in the 2000s or so. They were doing all that kind of stuff. So those are the type of people that were brought here for some odd reason. And that causes a problem because their culture is incompatible. They don't want to assimilate here. A lot of them, even though I think English is the official language, a lot of them don't even speak English. I was watching a video online, one of these right-wing, I believe one of these right-wing influencers was talking about the Somali population in there. And they were on the streets. I believe it. I lived out there. Got great food. I'm not Piers Morgan. Piers Morgan said that he was, he'll trade whatever chicken tiki sala, whatever, for Indian food for the Indians being there, some stupid stuff like that. But that's what I think about because I was out there is the great food. So let me break it down a little bit. Then we'll get into some video reactions and stuff. This massive fraud scheme spanned food aid, housing support, autism therapy programs. One of the largest public assistance fraud incidents in U.S. history. Dozens charged with stealing hundreds of millions of dollars that were actually, let's not lose track, that they were actually meant for vulnerable people. Exploiting the kindness on the front end and the back end and the weakness. So the programs were very lax. Minnesota is just a weird Minnesota, and I don't know how the Scandinavians got like this. Part of their vibe is we welcome you and we kind of don't want to be racist. Like they don't really they stay the hell away from the Somalians. Everybody does. The blacks do. They got Somalian gangs out there, and it's just they're a whole different world. It's a different country. There's no assimilation, basically. There's some that have. I've talked with when I was out there. I've talked with many of them. Had no beef. I remember talking to a dude that I worked with, actually, Somalian, and he knew all the Supreme Court justices, would talk politics and all that. But generally speaking, they don't assimilate. So that's why there's heat on walls right now. And my goodness, rightfully so. So this Feeding Our Future fraud, this was a child nutrition program. They were a nonprofit, and in 2020, as we were going through the COVID craziness under Trump, the organization expanded as a sponsor for federally funded child nutrition sites. So this was created because they were supposed to feed out of school children. And my kids they get their lunch to them unless they don't want the lunch, then my wife will pack it for them. But that came out of COVID because I think they did some type of program where everybody gets a meal or whatever, even if you couldn't pay for it. So my kids get it built in with the taxes or whatever. So because kids were out of school, remember, they shouldn't have been out of school. We're not going to lose track of that. So the kids were out of school, and so my understanding is this program was meant to say, hey, these kids are out of school, and Trump executive orders said we have essential businesses and non-essential businesses. Many of you, like myself, might have taken your laptop home. I'll never forget it. It was February, I believe. I had gotten what I think was COVID in December of the year before. It was like a 1 or 2 day fever, weird thing. I never really had like a fever like that for like 1 day. Then I felt great. I don't know if it was or not. It was going around where I was working, but they said, hey, they just came in one day, everybody get a laptop, go on home. And so they were saying, well, if people aren't working, well, I was lucky enough to be able to work from home, but if you're not able to work, how do you feed your kids? That's when the rent freezes, all that came out. So they said, oh, let's start a nonprofit. They had started it back in 2017, but let's sign up for this federal program and we'll feed children out of school. The government will pay us money to get food and feed children. In reality, it engineered a massive fraud scheme because it recruited dozens of shell restaurants, childcare centers, nonprofits. All these places were posing as meal distribution sites. Then they claimed they weren't really meal distribution sites, meaning kids could go there, people would bring their kids there to get food. No, that's not what happened. But they claimed to serve meals to thousands of children per day. So the government was paying them to feed thousands of children per day, but they didn't have many staff at all. And there were over 250 fake sites that were open statewide between March 2020 and January 2022. This is from the FBI website is where I'm getting this, direct from source, their allegations. So they claim to have served 125 million meals in under 2 years. They forged attendance rosters. They used random name generators and fake ages. This was before LLMs got big, what we call AI, large language models got big, where you could probably just do that in 2 seconds. They were using the website, a naming website, allegedly. And then they used fake ages that were randomized with an Excel spreadsheet. They submitted fake invoices for bulk food services and recycled lists of children's names with changing the ages to pad their claims, because it's a lot of work when you got to grift. When you got to grift for the millions and the hundreds of millions, sometimes you cut a few corners. So in exchange for facilitating these claims, they collected more than $18 million in administrative fees, and the employees got bribes and kickbacks disguised as consulting payments. The fraud kept on going until January 20 of 2022, when the FBI executed 25 search warrants around the Twin Cities, raiding Feeding Our Future offices and numerous sites. I don't think I ever covered it. I don't remember covering it. I remember reading about it, but I wasn't even in the same mindset where I might even looked at it how I am now. Now let's fast forward, because they charged 47 defendants. By now, 2025, they expanded to 78 people charged in just the Feeding Our Future case. That's just one of the cases, with over 50 guilty pleas and several convictions, including the leader, Amy Bach. So authorities estimate that $250 million was stolen from the federal child nutrition program through this conspiracy. just the government just absolutely, I mean, this is criminal from the top all the way down, not even just the people doing it. And the Amy Brock woman, I believe, is just, she's not Somali. But it's just unbelievable. We'll get to the Somalian stuff. But all that money was diverted to personal use, basically. What did they spend it on? What would you spend it on if you didn't have the drive to work and you felt like you could go to sleep at night grifting 200, and grift is a horrific, it's not even a strong enough word, stealing $250 million and you get your cut and you get, I don't know, 18 million. What would you do? What would you do with that? Well, they bought luxury cars. Great. Luxury cars. That's going to last a lifetime. That was worth stealing the money for. Luxury cars, expensive vacations, trips to Turkey, real estate. Well, that kind of makes sense. Jewelry, just gluttonous behavior. But on the good side, 3% of the claims actually went toward funding children. 3%. You see, what the Somalians and Amy Brock and others, it wasn't just the Somalians, what they don't understand is you can do this legally. You just got to step your game up. What are they doing what were they doing in Ukraine? We just covered the Ukraine scandal. Rand Paul said, well, let's do an IG or somebody to investigate where the funds are going, the fraud. We know there's fraud. Where is it going? CBS did a special on it. Congress voted no. Why? Because they just wanted to keep the fraud going. The kickbacks, all that. They all are getting kickbacks and doing all kinds of stuff. Y'all are just too stupid. You're doing it too much in the open. You probably didn't buy off the politicians enough. If you would have bought off DC, you never would have got raided. What's going on here? You didn't set aside some funds for DC? So after the food aid fraud came, then the floodgates opened to other fraud that we saw, housing assistance fraud. This was one that was uncovered in Minnesota's Housing Stabilization Services, HSS program. Sounds great and wonderful. It's a Medicaid-funded initiative. It launched in 2019 to help seniors and people with disabilities or mental illness find and maintain housing. It was administrated by the State Department of Human Services, of course, but it had low barriers for service providers to jump in. So the conditions that in hindsight made the program susceptible to fraud because it was so easy to get in, the Justice Department admitted that. That is a quote. Made the program susceptible to fraud. That is a quote from justice.gov. So expenditures exploded from an expected 2.6 million to over 21 million in 2021, 42 million in 2022, 74 in the next year, 104 in last year. They eventually determined that many program providers defrauded the system by acquiring names of eligible clients. So this sounds like these were real names, often from addiction treatment centers or homeless shelters, and billing for housing support services that were never given. Just nonstop. How about autism? The autism therapy scam. We just found this one out. This was one that we found out September. Prosecutors charged a defendant involved in defrauding Minnesota's early intensive developmental and behavioral intervention program. That is EIDBI. I put that in the song. Nobody's going to know what that is, but I put that acronym in the song that I'm doing about this. The EIDBI, remember, that's the Early Intensive Developmental and Behavioral Intervention Program. Funded by Medicaid and run via the State Department of Human Services, paid for medically necessary therapy. This is the ABA for children under 21 with autism spectrum disorders. So the according to the charges, this one was a Somali, and this Somalian was also involved in the Feeding Our Future meal fraud. They were in both. stole over $14 million from the autism program by operating a sham therapy provider called Smart Therapy LLC. They founded Smart Therapy LLC in 2019, enrolled it as the EIDBI provider, registered it as well. So that wasn't enough. They also registered it as a Feeding Our Future meal site. So why wouldn't they, did they take the money and just stay here in the U.S.? Why wouldn't they just leave? Unbelievable. Thereby exploiting two programs parallel. Damn, boy. So listen to this. Hassan's team, this is the one that was doing the fraud on the therapy of the autism and the food, paid kickbacks to parents between $300 and $1,500 per month per child to keep families enrolled in Smart Therapy with higher payoffs if a child was authorized for more intensive, expensive services. This created a bidding war for patients. Some large families even switched to competing fake therapy centers offering bigger monthly bribes, all stealing federal funds. To cover their tracks, the conspirators forged provider signatures and obtained sign-offs from a willing, qualified supervisor. Man, they were wilding. Man, they were out here wild. Man, this is just, who knows what we don't know? So just to sum it up, the child nutrition program estimated theft all in, because everyone's skimming it as it gets down, all in. And as you saw with the autism one, that one came all the way down to the parents being involved. So when you break it down all the way, the food one, that one was fraud totaling up to about $250 million stolen. The housing stabilization services, again, we're all in Minnesota, $8 million stolen. The EIDBI autism therapy program, about $14 million stolen. Yikes. Tim Walz is a Democrat, as you know, the goofy ass dude. He took office in 2019 and he led Minnesota through the pandemic years. So that's why he's out here sweating bullets on TV. Let's listen to just a couple clips and we'll keep on going.
Why do you think Nancy Mace is targeting you as much as she is?
It's an easy clickbait. There is a lot of hate in this country for Muslims. There's a lot of hate in this country for...
So this is just a taste of Ilhan Omar. I'm going to go deeper into her right now and the problems I have with her. There's people who I really respect who actually like Ilhan Omar, and I'm just very confused by that. I don't see what she brings to the table other than this. Other than covering, other than trying to make everything about, obviously, this cliche racism. I don't see what she brings to the table. So let's listen to her talk about, I know we're not going to do the marrying your brother jokes right now.
Black people, especially black women, and there is a lot of hate, severe hate for immigrants. And so I fit the mold. She knows that she can easily raise money and get support for her bigotry from her bigoted, the bigoted people who want to give money to her campaign. But the reality is, in this country, the First Amendment does not only protect speech, it protects the right and liberty for anybody to practice their faith. I do practice the Muslim faith. I am an immigrant. I am proud of both of those things. And I was, of course, born in Somalia, which the president likes to mention. And I'm also proud of my Somali heritage, and that is not something that they can take away from me. And I just want to say, one thing that the president should understand is that you can't impeach a sitting member of Congress. And it is unfortunate that the members of Congress have not educated their uneducated president about how things work in Congress.
At this graph showing the explosion in this program. This is the amount of money the state has paid in Medicaid claims to autism treatment providers using your tax dollars. You can see in 2017, not that much, just more than $1 million. But you see the gradual growth here. In 2021, more than $80 million. But look at last year, more than $220 million paid out in claims with a grand total of just shy of $700 million. This is what state investigators are now looking at, these soaring costs, and questioning how many providers are doing real work.
Federal prosecutors say Minnesota is grappling with one of the biggest welfare fraud waves in U.S. history. And now counterterrorism officials warn some of that money is likely ending up in the pockets of al-Shabaab, an al-Qaeda-linked terror group operating out of Somalia.
Is the biggest funder of al-Shabaab, the al-Qaeda-linked terror group in Somalia, actually the Minnesota taxpayer? A federal investigator says yes. An alarming claim first reported by City Journal, which spoke with multiple former federal agents. The U.S. Attorney's Office has charged dozens of defendants across multiple schemes, including housing aid fraud, pandemic child nutrition fraud, and false billing for autism therapy. In total, prosecutors say these schemes have cost Minnesota taxpayers billions of dollars.
Still, there are people that legitimately could use those resources that are not getting those resources. It's past criminal.
Minnesota is home to one of the country's largest Somali communities. Former state fraud investigator Keish Magan, himself a Somali American, wrote last year that it's uncomfortable and true that nearly all defendants in these major fraud cases come from that community.
They have taken advantage of the most generous country in the world and one of the most generous states in that country.
And according to City Journal, some of the stolen money was sent overseas through informal cash transfer networks. Investigators say once that cash arrived in Somalia, al-Shabaab took a cut, whether the sender intended that or not.
It's hard to watch this, man. Just to see this going on, what does accountability look like? I don't see anything that even brings us close to what you would consider to be accountability, and that's very concerning. Why is that? There's a deep reason for that, and part of it is just the way that Minnesota's set up. Minnesota is a very, very unique part of the country, and let's just look at that. So when we look at the area out there, they are very tribal. The Somalian groups are very, literally, they're like clans, basically, out there. It's like family clusters and clans. That's how they operate. Many of the schemes we're finding out were somewhat of a family-based business, and they involved the community. As you can see, they involved even parents. It was like, that was like a community type of thing where everybody was all in on it. If you look at it, there's a sibling ring here. Brothers Abdulakir Salah and Abdi Salah, they both pleaded guilty to stealing millions in meal program funds. Married couples, several schemes pulled in husbands and wives or in-laws. So they kept it all in the family, very clearly. Married couples, a ton of them involved here. The one that had a nonprofit called Academy for Youth Excellence. Remember, there were hundreds of fraud sites at like the middle management level of this. This husband and wife, relatives, Sarah Noor and Abdiwabab Muhammad, co-led another youth program, Academy for Youth Excellence. The family ties showed a tight-knit group coordinating their stories, covering for each other in the family, and bringing in people in the community, with one paying over $100,000 in kickbacks. So the couple siphoned over $5 million, with one of them paying $100,000 in kickbacks. That is per the Minnesota Reformer from March 13th, 2023. And the reason I got that, I said, let's look at, they're very close, like tight-knit community and family. Now they have clans and everybody fights. Everybody has fights among their people, but they're pretty tight-knit. So let's look at the historical roots of Minnesota, and then I'll kind of touch on maybe Trump a little bit, and I'll be out. Minnesota, they have a social welfare type of approach. It's very liberal in a way, and it's deeply rooted in the history of Scandinavian immigration and progressive politics. From my research here, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, this is something I've talked about off the cuff, but I've never done research in to kind of put more tangible proof to. The state's population swelled with people from Norway, Sweden, and Germany. We haven't seen any problems with those immigrants, not like this. We didn't see any problem with those. But they're the ones that came here and caused the problems. So maybe I should say we are now seeing problems with them. Very similar to why I think it was the South African, the immigrants that wanted to come here from South Africa, and I was like, hell no, I don't want the whites fleeing their country. They're not Scandinavian, obviously, but they're basically Minnesota, Norwegian, Sweden, German whites who are going to, in my opinion, come here and just vote for this type of stuff or look the other way for this type of stuff. How are Minnesotans not more upset about this? So they brought, and then many of them were Lutheran, they brought a cultural emphasis on community support and social improvement. So you can see you bring the poor blacks, refugees fleeing from a war-torn, civil war-torn country, and we're Lutherans. We believe the right thing to do is to support these people. This pushed Minnesota to the forefront of progressive reforms. So it's not an accident to me why all these things are bubbling up in Minnesota. It's starting in the 90s, as civic and religious groups built institutions to aid the needy. One scholar said Minnesota is considered a haven of progressive thought and action, one of the most liberal social policy frameworks in the country, in no small part as a result of these Nordic immigrants. In practice, it translated to a high trust, and I use that in the hook for a song I've got, because I put in the hook, I was like, maybe it's too high trust. I got it directly from this deep research I did. And the deep research, they were talking about this. This is from a website called religiousmncarleton.edu. So is this from the school? I guess it's from the school, Religions in Minnesota. It's just a good site on the story of Lutheran social service, history of the largest social service organization in Minnesota. It began with one pastor and 4 children. And that pulled a great article, exactly what I was looking for, kind of proof to like, how did this happen? And it says, it translated into a high trust, generous welfare model. And I think, let me look up the lyrics to the song, because I don't know the lyrics to the song that I created. The lyrics of the song, I'm like, it's a high trust. Maybe it shouldn't be so high trust. This is basically what the lyrics to the song are. So the lyrics of the song, and I tried to do somewhat of a play on Prince's joint, When Doves Cry, but made it different than that. I didn't want to make a corny like remake. So the chorus comes in, and I said, maybe the mercy too wide. Maybe the mercy was too wide. Maybe the trust was just too sky high. It's not even a maybe. So politically, Minnesota's Democratic Farmer Labor Party, it's such a weird thing here. That was born from a 1940s merger. And why am I doing this? How do you get to the point where you've got Scandinavian, some European whites who basically, they don't assimilate fully either, but they are much more assimilated with American culture than Somalians, much closer to the American culture I want. Maybe some people want a different culture. I don't know. Maybe some people want a different culture because for some reason you can't appreciate something that was created by whites. What is that? But I digress. How does it happen that a state that really should be great allows a small population of low IQ Somalians to literally just rape the country financially? I mean, relatively speaking, the Federal Reserve is the true rape, but just from a scheming and a scandal standpoint, that they're at the top of the line with this. Constant social upheaval, a black resists arrest, a black swallows a speedball, a black basically unlives himself, and all of a sudden the whole country's supposed to stop and build statues for him. People still don't acknowledge that was a whole lie. We still can't acknowledge that now. All of that coming from the Scandinavians who have this. This is not what they mean by Minnesota nice, but it's this toxic tolerance based on a weird interpretation of Christianity. So this high trust model led Minnesota to often partner with nonprofit and community organizations to deliver services rather than imposing heavy-handed oversight. That's just how they operate. They have a tradition of deference to nonprofits because of the charitable role of churches and civic groups, Lutheran social service, Catholic charities, etc. They manage refugees, resettling, housing, and feeding programs. Exactly the ones that the Somalis took advantage of. And they felt so confident. I don't even know if they really understand the DOJ and the FBI and the federal government. Honestly, I don't know how many of them understand that. If they're looking at it as the Minnesotans are the only ones that can really hem me up, and maybe I don't want to underestimate, I don't want to say they're my enemy, but I don't want to underestimate somebody, but maybe it makes sense if they're looking at the Minnesota government, these people with no oversight, kind of knew what was going on, still didn't do anything. If they feel those are the only people that can hold them accountable, then of course they're going to be brazen. They're going to take the loot and bring in their friends and family and not even leave the country. They don't even feel, they had plenty of money to leave the country. Why would they feel like they don't need to leave the country? They set the money back. They say, we're good here. We're not done here. They're not going to catch us here. And it just makes no sense. So the Minnesota's default position is to trust and not verify, with an emphasis on trust. So with those weak verification, federal government gives them all the money. The fraud was just bound to happen. And they knew it for a long time. The story of the discrimination lawsuit is just, it was just absolutely insane. Let me get to that real quick. Reading this, that was one of the most craziest parts of this. And I got to, I don't know if I mentioned on lives before. On Sunday, I'm cooking dinner on Sundays now, just to give my wife a break. I'm not a good chef, and I got some, I got a more complicated meal to make. It's not that complicated, but see these meals like I got on TikTok from Crazy Village Lady Mel. She posts recipes on Twitter sometimes. this braised leeks recipe with anchovies. I know some people don't like anchovies, but just for flavor. Then some chicken, and then some fondant potatoes. So I gotta do some prep. I gotta do some prep, so I gotta handle that. But and I did a song with the discrimination part, because that part was so crazy. That part was so crazy. Let me bring that up. So Amy Bach, who was the white, let's look at this toxic dynamic in Minnesota. So there was a confrontation between the Minnesota Department of Education and the Feeding Our Future organization in 2020 and 2021. The Minnesota Department of Education began noticing some of these things start looking funny with Feeding Our Future meal sites. Many of them were operated by these East African immigrants. You know, it's Ethiopia, what else? Somalia. I don't even know what other countries are over there. I just know Ethiopia because I love Ethiopian food. I just sound like that. I sound like that guy, don't I? But Ethiopian food is so good, man. It's just so good. What countries are over there? Okay, so let's it's I don't even know a country. Sudan, Somalia, Somaliland, Kenya. Yeah. All of them. Yeah, Kenya, that's where some of the money went. So yeah. Let me go to the incident here. So Amy Brock, who was the ringleader, you could say, filed a lawsuit in November of 2020 claiming that the Minnesota Department of Education was discriminating against her organization by slow walking approvals for her fake sites. In public and in court, Amy Brock and her allies essentially played the race card. They said that the only reason that the Minnesota Department of Education was scrutinizing them is because they worked with predominantly Somali and East African communities. So Ilhan Omar, those type of people, there should be no one who's more mad, more upset, more furious at this situation than them at those Somalis. Especially if you put your name on the line for Somalis. You want them to run for office. You say that anything you say bad about them is racism. It's just, I mean, it's really goes against everything you believe to allow the Somalis to go ahead and just take advantage of you like that. Crazy. It's just absolutely crazy. They sued Minnesota while they're doing the scam. How are you going to sue Minnesota while you're doing the scam? Oh my gosh. Oh my God. Well, that's how brazen it was. Because they knew if they put the racism stuff up on there, that was November of 2020, you know what time frame that was. So no one wants to be called racist. You'd rather lose millions of dollars to the program and maybe endanger your freedom for looking the other way. The state officials felt like they were in a defensive posture. Well, how do we know that? Internal documents and testimony later confirmed that the Minnesota Department of Education leadership felt hamstrung by the accusations. As the Legislative Auditor reported, even when the Minnesota Department of Education had serious concerns, it inappropriately deferred to the nonprofit and even let Feeding Our Future investigate complaints about itself. Wild. Wow. Absolutely bat-ish crazy. Absolute straight lunacy. Oh my goodness. So I'm just going through this history And I'm trying to figure out, how do people in a state, and now the state's populated, it's not all Scandinavian, even though you still see that when you go there. There's a bar called Skull that I go to. It's literally the Viking channel. But how does that happen where you live in a state that you allow this? And then it happens and you're still not upset. How are you still not upset at this point, Minnesotans? I'm going to go to the chat real quick and then look at Trump. All right. DR Lemo said, I really did the homework on history. Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. Ricky says, Ilhan Omar came to the U.S. not to escape oppression, but to escape justice for the atrocities for her family committed. Ilhan Omar's family were part of the ruling elite connected to the brutal Marxist. I did see that. I've seen those stories. I just have not done the work to dig into that. I mean, the whole thing, I haven't, I made some jokes about it. I haven't even really dug into the, basically the brother stuff, which, I mean, actually looks legit, believe it or not. Mike has bad knees is so right. If the grid went out here, we would be Somali in 3. I mean, it could be quicker than that, but that's not the point. We would become Somali in 3 weeks. Let's say it came out, 3 for the whole country. I'm thinking like just my little area. It would take a couple hours in just your local area. But let's just say the whole country. Yeah, about 3 weeks at the longest. We would be out here with machetes. I saw this video of this TikTok person giving out machetes to homeless people. I don't know if it's real or not. I don't know what's real anymore. Love your hair, mate. Yeah, my hair is awesome. Thank you. Ricky says, dictator of Syed Bir in Somalia. I don't know that. Oh, you're finishing your other comment. Yeah, I saw that. I can't comment on that. I believe it, but I can't confirm it or talk about it. Like, did I say deeper into her? Was that from Ilhan Omar? Yeah, I think I said something to the effect of, she's easy on the eyes. I didn't mean it like that. I can understand why you wanted that clarification. Is it Mike? Mike has bad knees. Like, just to clarify, what did deeper into her mean? No, I'm good. Even though she is actually attractive. AOC is not for me. Ilhan Omar is actually really attractive. She comes here and her husband's white, right? And she marries a white too. The whole thing is just, yo, man, the whole thing is just too much. And then she's here and then she marries a white. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with marrying a white, but the problem is her positions. With all the positions she has, it just doesn't add up. I mean, if you're gonna marry a white, wouldn't you be appreciative of the white? I mean, isn't that weird to marry into a white but not be appreciative of the white? How does that work? That's just weird. And it would go both ways. If you're a white, how could you not be appreciative of the Somali? It's not like Somalians have all bad traits. We've been talking about just the negative ones here that haven't allowed them to assimilate. But yeah, after the Civil War, we just started letting them in. It's not much different than the Afghan thing. It was even a little bit different, but they supposedly did interviews and all that, let them in, How did they get to Minnesota? Was it just jobs? Oh, okay. The initial placements, resettlement agencies, the Lutheran Social Service, same groups, chose certain cities as the sites. Minneapolis, St. Paul was attractive, existing refugee infrastructure, churches with resettlement programs, and a strong nonprofit sector. And a lot of trust and little verification, so it worked out perfectly. The first wave of Somali families were placed there in the 1990s. Once there was a small community in Minneapolis, then the relatives and friends wanted to move in to join them. From other cities, Atlanta, San Diego, Dallas, they're like, hey, the whites up here are pretty much letting us do what we want. You might want to come up here, basically. If you're Somali and then you hear, hey, my cousin's in Minnesota, there's a mosque, there's halal food, someone speaks Somali at the clinic, let's go there. They're not used to the snow. Why are they there? They're not used to the cold. Why are they there? They have melanin in their skin. They're not for that. The whites, they're pale whites. They're built for the cold and the snow. Your skin is melanin. You're dark skin. You should be in the sun. You should be in a hot climate. Why would you even want to go to Minnesota? No, there's no other reason other than for fraud like this. None. No other reason for them to want to be there. Especially in the 90s. You did have jobs, but in the 90s, you had jobs other places too. So they got comfortable, and that quickly we let them sit, and it's just like you let something fester, and now it's a dense community. How do you undo this now? Yeah, I don't know. If we're going to keep the states as a union, then it's something that we all have to think about. Lauren says Trump was found guilty of felonies and found liable for sexual abuse. It made conservatives love him more. It wouldn't matter to them if there are dozens of pictures of Trump on Epstein Island. So the charges against Trump were all fake. And I don't know what the strategy, looking back at it now, was. I mean, either the charges go through and they work, and then our whole system is literally just collapsed, or you did what you did, the charges were against him, they don't work, and now Trump is trying to do the same thing back to them, which I can't blame him for. I'm not for it. I'm not supporting it because it's for Trump. It's not for me. It's for Trump and Jews in Israel. It has nothing to do with me, what Trump's trying to do in retaliation. I'm not 100% against retaliation, but you've got to give me the case and the argument and why it's good. So the felonies against Trump were absolutely, I've broken those down. They were absolutely gunk. It was horrible, horrific. There was not an ounce of truth to any single one of them. It was very, very bad. Very, very evil from many levels. I don't know what was going on, but that's a moment in time that history is we're going to have to look back and kind of figure out what happened. The sexual abuse as well as there, I don't know. This is a he said, she said, but there's no evidence there. I'm not going to relive the whole thing. They actually redid the law in New York to bring it up. But with the Epstein stuff, that's Trump kind of using kind of the same thing and saying, I was voted president, so I can basically wipe these things off, say they were fraud, a scam, and not have to talk about the Epstein stuff. So that's we don't know what's in the Epstein stuff, but his covering up of the Epstein is well documented going back to his first term. So I'll agree with that. Yeah, thanks for joining, Lauren. Appreciate you. Mike has bad knees. We're on the important part of the scandal. The important part of the scandal is, why is Ilhan Omar's looks, why are her looks so underrated? And I don't know how that happened, and I'm not saying that in any type of, I'm not trying to say in any salacious type of way or anything. She's just, I mean, she's a good looking, she's an attractive woman. I don't know how she became so underrated. AOC, for some reason, got up there. Maybe it's the wrap or whatever she puts on her head. I'll end with Trump and just my America First takeaway. Trump brought this back up, and he was posted on Truth Social, and he posted that he was terminating, effective immediately, the temporary protected status program for Somalis in Minnesota, which I fully agree with. The TPS is the program. It is not going to solve anything, but it is. I am not against that stance. It's the program that let people from war-torn countries live and work here legally. We got to end that for sure. Then he said Minnesota under Tim Walz was a hub of fraudulent money laundering activity, which is objectively true. Somali gangs are terrorizing the people of that great state, which is objectively true. Just from the scandal, we know that there were gangs involved in Somali clans, is what they call them, or gangs or groups of people, and that billions of dollars are missing. I don't know if the total gets to $1 billion or not. I think I put that in the title, but it's a lot of money. He ended with send them back to where they came from. It's over. And then that's where I kind of part ways, because I fundamentally think the problem is who's in control. Who is in control? Trump was in control during the pandemic, and breaking it down from there. You can't be the one to tell me to send them home. I want to go up higher up the ladder and figure out who's really running this thing. How did this happen? Who's really running this stuff? So no, I am not for send them back home. No, I want to start with the top. Broader, obviously imprison those who broke the law. Trump said Somalians have caused a lot of trouble and that the U.S. should not take their people anymore. We shouldn't take anybody anymore. I don't care if they're white, black, Somalian, anybody. None of them. Nobody. We got to figure this out right now. And I understand that a lot of the reason why we opened it up is birth rates and stuff, but we got to figure that out. So Trump basically kind of bubbled that up doing that. And Tim Walz was on Meet the Press. I think he was on Meet the Press today, because he's under fire. I mean, this is not looking good. And it kind of didn't look, it kind of didn't go well from the clips, but he's just kind of goofy. It's hard for him to do like a serious kind of sit down type thing because he's just so awkward. But let's see. I believe this is it here, and then I'll be out.
And joining me now is Democratic Governor from Minnesota, Tim Walz, chair of the Democratic Governors Association and a top surrogate for President Biden. Governor Walz, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here on this caucus eve and break.
This caucus. I should have had that ready. I saw him on there earlier today. If I'm not mistaken, I could have swore I saw him on there. I'm just going to look it up real quick because I want to hear what he has to say. I believe he was talking about Trump saying retarded or something like that. Who cares? Nobody cares about the word retarded anymore. And Nick Fuentes had a great point because Tucker Carlson, well, I looked that up. Tucker Carlson pressed up Piers Morgan on using certain terms. I don't even know what YouTube does, so I'm not going to use the terms. He was using the bundle of sticks. And he said, hey, Piers, why don't you just say the word bundle of sticks, bundle of sticks? And Piers was like, no, basically because in the EU or UK, wherever they were at, in the UK, they're much more strict on speech. And Nick was like, that's not based. Retard, that's not an edgy word. Bundle of sticks isn't an edgy word. Why don't you use the hard ER, Tucker? I'll do the same thing with you. And that made a lot of sense to me. It's like, if you're going to really want to talk about what you can say, what you can't say, and Nick brings that up because he's like, people go at me for using the word, and he's not using it in any type of hateful way. He's just using it. But let's look at the clip here. I think this is it. Might be a commercial first, though. Yep, loading the ad. This is from the Daily Beast, and I think this is the clip if it does load. But that would be an interesting test for Tucker.
Well, Governor, let me have you weigh in on this, because part of your initial response to President Trump's post was to call for him to release the results of his MRI. And I want to give you a chance
what the hell are we talking about?
Give our viewers exactly a sense of what you mean. What exactly?
I'm struggling here. What the? He's talking about that is the right date. today. Wow. I don't know what
exactly were you suggesting by that, Governor?
Well, here we got a guy on Thanksgiving where we spent time with our families, we ate, we played Yahtzee, we cheered for football or whatever. This guy is apparently in a room ranting about everything else. This is not normal behavior. It is not healthy. And President
ranting about everything else. He was pretty specific. He was ranting about you and fraud in your state from Somalians, if I'm not mistaken. What do you mean ranting about everything else? Be specific.
Presidents throughout time have released a couple things. They've released their tax returns, not Donald Trump, and they've released their medical records, not Donald Trump. And look, the MRI is one thing, but I think what's most concerning about this is, as your viewers out there are listening, has anyone in the history of the world ever have an MRI assigned to them and have no idea what it was for, as he says? So look, it's clear the president's fading physically. I think the mental capacity, again, ranting, crazily at midnight on Thanksgiving about everything else. There's reasons for us to be concerned. This is a guy that randomly says the airspace over Venezuela is closed. He's ruminating on if you could win a nuclear war. Look, this is...
Well, but that's not, those are bad policies, but that's...
Joining me now is Democratic Governor.
I mean, that's not him being crazy, though. He's just working for people behind the scenes.
Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota. Governor Walz, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Good to be with you, Kristen. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. Thanks you so much for being here. I do want to start with the tragic shooting of the two National Guard service members. In the aftermath of the shooting, as you know, President Trump has responded by vowing to crack down on refugees, including from countries beyond Afghanistan, specifically targeting the Somali community in your home state. He also described you using a slur widely regarded as derogatory toward people with
targeting the Somali community as if there's no reason to be targeting the Somali community.
Intellectual disabilities. I want to read for you what he said, Governor, and get your reaction on the other side. He said hundreds of thousands.
Why aren't they the American Somalis? Like, why are they their own community?
Thousands of refugees from Somalia are completely taking over the once great state of Minnesota. Somalian gangs are roving the streets looking for prey as our wonderful people stay locked in their apartments and houses.
Well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the whites who allowed this with toxic tolerance. Let's talk about them too. I actually would rather talk about them than the Somalis. I want to go even up higher, but nobody's really talking about what's happening there in the bigger picture. That's where Trump should be coming from. That's the angle. That's the angle to come at this from. How are you allowing this? They don't have the mental acuity to control the state. I mean, they're trying to rise up. You've seen Ilhan Omar. She herself is, I think, very smart. But as a group, they don't have, that's just not their natural thing. Everybody no group is better than another group, but every group has different things. There's nobody in America who wants to join a society run by Somalians. Let's just say that out loud. So they're not controlling anything. How is this happening? That's what I need to hear talked about.
Hoping against hope they'll be left alone. The seriously blank governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, does nothing, either through fear, incompetence, or both.
True.
What is your response to President Trump, Governor?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me express my condolences to the families of the National Guardsmen. They're out there doing their duty. They serve us. As a commander-in-chief of the National Guard and someone who served, we have a responsibility to put them in a position where they're protected and they have a clear mission. And so I would express my condolences there. Look, Donald Trump insulting me is a badge of honor for me, but I think we all know, both as an educator for a couple decades and as a parent, using that term is just so damaging. It's hurtful. We have fought 3 decades to get this out of our schools. Kids know better than to use it. But look, this is what Donald Trump has done. He's normalized this type of hateful behavior and this type of language.
Is he talking about the word retarded? Is that what we're doing?
And mainly, look, at first, I think it's just because he's not a good human being. But secondly, to distract from his incompetency. We know we just came through a Thanksgiving where prices are up. We know people are concerned about heating their homes as we're experiencing blizzards out here. At the same time, he's cutting those programs. So, look, we cannot allow this to be normalized. The people who, Trump is, like, this is language police. You guys are woke. many times it's just about being decent to people and making them feel included. You can use that word, sure, you can use that language, but you shouldn't. And that's something that Donald Trump fails to realize. But again, Kristen, this is cruelness, this is meanness, it's aimed at a broader community. And as far as demonizing our Somali community, maybe he could help us on some things. Demonizing an entire community, folks who are in the professions, educators, artists, doctors, lawyers, entrepreneurs, they bring the diversity and the energy to a place like Minnesota. And for him to just randomly decide to do this, it makes no sense. Do your job, get the criminals out, secure our border, but do it with dignity and respect to the American tradition of respecting immigrants and refugees as a beacon of hope.
Well,
oh my goodness. Wow. That's who you guys elect to run your state? You're happy with that? That is just appalling. He answers the question with nothing but, he's talking about the word retard, just vague. It's just a vacuous words that mean absolutely nothing, that address absolutely nothing. Way worse than even Trump, I'm out on Trump, but this is not worse enough for me to, like, if I had to vote between them, that I would pick Trump over this. They're ultimately fundamentally the same, but there's a lot here that is really, really despicable.
Speaking of the Somali community, President Trump is targeting them and your state in part. He's citing fraud as the reason for his crackdown. Dozens of people of EIDBI. Do you take responsibility for failing to stop this fraud in your state?
Well, certainly I take responsibility for putting people in jail. Governors don't get to just talk theoretically. We have to solve problems.
And so I want to give you a chance to respond to this. Do you take responsibility for failing to stop this fraud in your state?
Well, certainly I take responsibility for putting people in jail. Governors don't get to just talk theoretically. We have to solve problems. And I will note, it's not just Somalis. Minnesota is a generous state. Minnesota is a prosperous state, a well-run state. We're AAA bond rated, but that attracts criminals. Those people are going to jail. We're doing everything we can. But to demonize an entire community on the actions of a few, it's lazy. And as you heard Senator Kelly say, this president has cut a lot of inspector generals. He's cut programs that could help us tackle this on. So we'll take it on. We'll put folks in jail. I don't care what your nationality is. I don't care what your religion is, your color. If you're committing crimes, these are programs that were meant to serve students with autism, to housing, and to making sure people had enough to eat. There's a reason Minnesota ranks as the top, lowest childhood poverty, best place for children to live. People are taking advantage of that. They're going to prison. That is totally disconnected with demonizing an entire group of people who came here fleeing civil war and created a vibrant community that makes Minnesota and this country better. But that's Donald Trump. Deflect, demonize, come up with no solutions. He's not going to help fix anything on fraud. My God, there's a big difference between fraud and corruption is something he knows about.
Well, Governor, let me have you weigh in on this, because part of your initial response to President Trump's post was to call for him to release the results of his MRI. And I want to give you a chance to give our viewers exactly a sense of what you mean. What exactly were you suggesting by that, Governor?
So look, it's clear the president's fading physically.
A couple more to get to here. I want to talk about the Democrats. You were, of course, the Democratic vice presidential nominee in 2024 because President Biden dropped out over concerns about his fitness for office. Vice President Harris, in her new book, said it was, quote, recklessness for former President Biden's allies to leave the decision about running for re-election up to him.
Yeah, I couldn't care less about that. So I'm going to take away from just a Christian standpoint. They wanted to run their state and they still, looks like they still are, to serve third world refugees, basically bending everyone else over for these third world refugees. And they believe that is a Christian virtue, and it is not. We are all sinners. There is nothing in Christianity that says you need to believe that everyone should be trusted. That is not a part of the religion. Don't know where they get that from, because that's how they operate. And I guess it's more they're operating, not everyone. If someone's a refugee from a war-torn country, you should trust all of them. That doesn't make any sense. Christians should be very careful on who they assist and who they do not assist. Everyone is not worthy of your assistance. That is probably the number one takeaway from this. And you have to put something in place to make sure if you are going to assist, which is if you assist the right person in the right way, I think that is actually very good and aligned with the religion, with the faith. But if you're just blindly trusting everyone and blindly assisting anyone, that does not, because you could be assisting sin. You could be assisting evil. And if you know that you are, and then you turn your back away, I don't even know what you're practicing the religion for. So Mike Has Bad Needs was talking about, well, the principles were taken advantage of. Yes, the first thing we have to look at is, what are the principles? These people just take religion and bastardize it to twist it into whatever they want it to be. It's disgusting. I'm out. I gotta go find leeks. Leeks are out of season, so I gotta go. On that note, I gotta go. So I did do a song. I'm gonna play it. The lyrics came out weird, so I'm a little disappointed. It didn't come out as well as I wanted it to. But I'm gonna see what I do with it. See if I can fix it up. A lot of stuff hits the, what do you call it? I don't even know the saying anymore. The drawing board or the floor, and never makes it. But I like the song, that's for sure. But the lyrics weren't on the screen, didn't sync up, so whatever. Appreciate y'all. I'm out.
Minnesota's child meals in COVID's grave. Feeding our future swelled from 3 mil to 220 days. Sights that weren't there, just invoices in the frame. Education froze funds, but the racism played. Lawsuits flew fast, kept the cash on display. 250 million gone, laundered far away. $1 billion wake up in the North Star's delay. Maybe the trust was just too sky to halt the schemes before they multiply. Maybe the fear is just too deep to defy. The block that votes while the needy cry. Maybe the mercy too wide to deny. The temp stays turning permanent lie when doves cry. Minnesota's wide. When the funds run dry, the homeland sighs. Touch, if you will, the homes for the broken and frail. Housing stabilization, a 2.6 start, then 100 million gale. Medicaid for the disabled, but the service is pale. Built for ghost kickbacks in the Somali trail. No real aid delivered, just echoes that fail. Walls shut it down when the feds raise the sail. But the theft rolled on, leaving families to wail. In the land of 10,000 lakes, now a hollow tale. Maybe the trust was just too sky to hold the schemes before they multiply. Maybe the fear is just too clock that votes while the needy cry. Maybe the mercy too wide to deny. The temp stays turning, permanent lie when doves cry. Minnesota's why. When the funds run dry. Autism therapy's 14 mil in the dark. EIDBI false flags enroll in the spark. Kids certified, wrong parents paid for the mark. Clan networks thriving while real health falls apart. Post-Floyd chills grip the watchdog's heart. DA shields block the audit's art. Osiris unveils the index red chart. Claw Minnesota back before it tears apart. Can a governor preach from the dome so still when remittances ride to the Somali hill? No more TPS loopholes bending the wheel when doves cry.